So I get a tremendous amount of questions inside the personal development school that ask me things along the lines of how do we grieve our childhood experiences as a fearful avoidant or any other attachment style. And what I really wanted to go through in this video here is not only how do we grieve childhood experiences, how do we make peace with the relationship with our parents that may have not been the way that we wanted or needed it to be, and how do we also do that work around any grief from painful or traumatic events that might have taken place that impacted us as individuals? So, in this video, I'm going to cover that specifically for fearful avoidance. I'm doing a series for all the different attachment styles who are insecurely attached. So, I have some exciting news, which is that we are doing $1,000 off of our lifetime membership sale to the Personal Development School, which means you get access to literally everything at PDS for your entire rest of your life. Essentially, that entails all of our different courses you have lifetime access to. I do 4 live webinars a week, every single week. You can access them ongoing, and you get access to all of our daily community events. So I'd love to see you on the other side, and you can access it by using the link in the description box below. The first thing that you need to start out, we'll cover about 6 or 7 points here. So point number 1, when you come into the world, we sort of to a certain degree see our parents as like God, right? You come out into the world, you can't use language yet, and you just inherently and biologically know that you are reliant on these people around you all the time, on your caregivers for survival. And you know to some degree that without them, you might die. Right? You have this certain degree of this person takes care of me. I am surrendered to them. They sort of rule over my life. And to a certain degree, what I see time and time and time again, and I think this is pretty much everybody's experience, is at a young age, and the time at which that changes is different for everybody, but sometimes it's throughout their whole life. We tend to put our parents on a huge pedestal, right? We see them as these individuals who looked after us, took care of us, and at a very deep unconscious and subconscious level, we sort of have this element of being like, helpless to them, reliant on them. And that's some of the earliest programming that we acquire. And the most deep impact of programming actually exists between the ages of 0 to 3 years old, followed by 3 to 8 years old, because of how profound of an impact this has on our unconscious and subconscious mind. It's the time we're most likely to sort of sponge up all of our programming the most impactfully. And during this time, it's very easy because we put somebody on such a huge pedestal to not have this sort of conscious logical realization that, hey, guess what? Your parent is just a human, just an individual, just like you. And they have their own traumas and their own history and their own degree of experiences that have impacted them. And although you might have them on this huge pedestal, they can't do everything perfectly. And I've had so many conversations with people in private practice over the years in the past where people would come to me and be like, but my mother should have been this way. My father should have never done these things. And, had these very strong attachments to those concepts or ideas. But the reality is, if that's your experience of saying somebody should or shouldn't have, you are arguing with past experiences. You're in resistance to the past, and you will never win that battle, right? No matter how much you argue with the past about how it should have been different, that will always be something that causes you distress, unnecessary suffering, and it won't do anything productive for you. So there's this idea that we sort of, the higher we put somebody on a pedestal, almost the further the fall from grace, right? Because if we have these sort of ideas where somebody's on this huge pedestal, there's a lot of just subconscious expectations that accompany that. And people will make mistakes that will never meet all of your expectations. And so it brings us to this idea that when we're grieving this relationship to our parents to a certain degree, if there was some childhood trauma or a lot of unmet needs that you're grieving from the past, part of the healing journey, and there's many parts, but one of the first steps of the healing journey is to be able to take your parent off the pedestal and to have this recognition that this person is a human being as well, just like yourself, and that you will never be, if you tend to be a parent or plan to be a parent in the future or currently are a parent, you'll have mistakes that you make as well. And that's the norm, right? And especially for most of us in our adult lives now, our parents' generation had a very limited amount of access to things that helped to support and create emotional literacy, right? Like there was not a lot of discussions around mental emotional wellness. And so, there's an even stronger limitation around some of those facets. So, one of the first things is to realize, hey, your parent made mistakes because they were doing the best they could with what was available to them at the time. And it's such an important part of processing. And if you want to sit down because I've seen a lot of people come into PDS, and I saw this enormously in my private practice, is that if you sit with people and you help them make a list of their should. So if you're struggling with this, right, because you're here watching this video, make a list of all of the things that you think your parents should have been. Okay. Because all of these things are hurting you. Like every time I say this person should have been this way, should have done that thing, I'm again just arguing with the past and I will always lose. There's nothing productive that comes from that. And instead, we want to start accepting the differences. We want to start to have an understanding for why somebody was the way that they are. This does not mean, to be clear, and we're going to talk about this in some of the other points in this video, this absolutely does not mean that if you have an unhealthy person in your life, right? If somebody's a very unhealthy parent with a lot of trauma and they're constantly doing unhealthy or toxic things, it doesn't mean bring them into your life and just completely forgive and be boundaryless. But we can forgive and understand and have wisdom and compassion without having to violate our own boundaries to try to maintain a connection. We can have really strong boundaries and also really strong compassion. And those things are not mutually exclusive. We tend to think that way until we sort of dive into these concepts in a more nuanced way and dig deeper into our own inner wisdom and understanding. And so when you see this dynamic, it's so valuable to be able to look at, okay, why? Like, let's just pretend that you're sitting down and you're like working on your mother and you're like, my mother should have not been enmeshed, not been codependent, and then taught me codependency and enmeshment and taught me that that's how relationships were. And then, there's going to be a lot of stories you have if you look, right? And, well, why? According to their programming, my mother's programming, or whichever parent you're working on, why, according to her programming, should she have been codependent? Because we're not looking to have the ego mind play God, right? We're not looking to have, you know, my parents should have been the way that I determined them to be. That's not how life works, right? And it hurts us to think that way. It hurts us to invest in that concept or idea. What we are trying to do is see reality, because reality is a lot kinder than us being in resistance to reality that we cannot change. And so when we can look at this and be like, you know what, why should this have happened? Why should this person have been this way? And when we can look at their programming, their childhood, their experiences, and if you don't know some of the answers to this, ask questions to family members, ask questions to people around you, and get some of those answers. But if you have this idea, so-and-so should have never been codependent, and then you look and it's like, oh, well, they were taught codependency from their parents. So yes, they should have been codependent because that's reality. That's often how things tend to take shape. And getting out of resistance puts you into acceptance. And almost more importantly, it puts you into actual empathy, because when we are projecting our ideas of how somebody should be onto them, we're not in empathy, we're not in compassion. And so we want to be able to sort of get rid of those things that are causing us this constant heartache, because we're in resistance to something that we cannot change. And we're not seeing that person as their own individual human with their own individual background, history, and programming. And so to put those ideas to rest about how somebody should have been is to stop having this sort of subconscious aspect of self that tries to play God and say, this is how it should be, and it's my way, and everything should have been the way I determined it to be. That's just not how it works. It only hurts us to keep investing in that. So step number one here, I know this is a very long step, but step number one here is to write out all your shoulds and then try to actually look at them, hold each one to the light. Why should this person have actually been this way? Why should this person have done this thing? Knowing what I know about them and their programming, even if it was an unkind thing, can I come to understand it? We have a lot of room for acceptance when we understand things. We have very minimal room for acceptance when we can't understand something. And so that's where we naturally go into resistance, and then we suffer, not the person, we suffer. So that's sort of point number one. Point number two is this is also, if you're grieving the past, you want to also look at finding your footing in that relationship. Just because you can understand and just because you can see somebody's patterns of behavior for what they are, doesn't mean in turn that you then have to just let them fully into your life if it's not a healthy thing for you. So finding your footing as step number two here really means determining like what boundaries you need to have, even with that understanding. So let's just say, for example, that um, somebody has a lot of narcissistic tendencies, and let's say they're very critical and very mean, in your relationship, it's not going to be healthy for you. Even if you understand it, you get it, you're like, look, I see where that came from. Their parents were super mean and cruel, and criticism was like the norm, and that's how they were programmed. I see it. It's not about me. It's not about me not being good enough. It's about this programming getting passed down. It doesn't then mean that you're like, okay, great, I'm going to expose myself to that every day for hours. It can mean, hey, I'm going to not take that so personally now because I see it more clearly and I understand it better. And I'm also going to have good boundaries. And finding your footing means defining what those boundaries are for you. Sometimes that's a testing ground. We have a whole course on this. It's called How to Repair Any Relationship. And basically, the big theme of this course, you can check it out for free, by the way, too, using the link down below. But the theme of this course is that, in this Repair Any Relationship course, it's about learning what quality of relationship you're supposed to be having, what stage of closeness that relationship is supposed to be at. And we talk about the different stages of closeness, and then how to do the work to find that perfect fit for you and that person you're working on the relationship with. And for some people, it's, very high level, chatting once a month on the phone and sort of keeping a distance. For some people, it's actually sharing more personal things about yourself and being able to build a deeper connection. But each individual relationship has a place. And we have to be able to actually figure out what that place is through understanding the person, understanding ourselves and our own needs in relationship to that person, respecting both, and then finding what comes out of that as a proper amount of contact and a proper amount of openness and vulnerability for the relationship to be as harmonious as it possibly can be. In other words, to reach its full potential and the capacity between those two individuals and the current circumstances in their life. So finding your footing means like finding those boundaries, finding your needs, listening to yourself and seeing what works for you best, and sort of testing little things out, a little more closeness. Oh, I got hurt. I see that this is going to continue to happen. I set a boundary, it was still violated. Okay, I'm going to take a bigger step back and sort of finding that path that works best for you. Number three is being able to meet the unmet needs. So this really goes into like healing from the past, right? Doing grieving work around your past experiences. There will almost always, even in securely attached relationships, be some sort of degree of unmet needs not met between parent and child, because we haven't had emotional literacy tools around for a long time. Children can't voice their needs at a very young age. And there's just going to inevitably be things that take place. And so making a list in step number three here of all of your unmet needs from your parents, and then your goal for healing, and this sounds so cheesy, but it's one of the most powerful elements of healing, is your goal is to become your own parent, to meet the needs in your personal life that you couldn't get. So if you had very critical parents, you have to become self-encouraging and self-validating. If you had parents who, weren't able to talk about emotions, that's your work to be able to do in your adult life. Notice your emotions, care for your emotions, express them. If you felt misunderstood, the more you understand yourself, the better, right? So, and what this enables you to do is then have this baseline in your own relationship to self that will empower your relationships to then get those needs met in other areas of life in your upbringing, and even be able to then go and communicate some of those unmet needs and see if your parents, when you communicate clearly, are able to meet some of those needs more effectively in your adult life. Or if a parent has passed or anything of that nature, to bring those into your romantic partnerships, your friendships, other family relationships. Number four is the beliefs that you acquired, drop them. In other words, the painful beliefs, every person on the planet has a certain degree of painful self-beliefs they acquired from parenting, from being parented. And some of these things are, I'm not good enough, I'm unlovable, there will be many, many different ones. I can't trust, I am unsafe. It depends on the person, the attachment style. We know for fearful avoidance, some of the biggest ones are, I am unsafe, I will be betrayed, I will be trapped, helpless, powerless, I am unworthy, I am bad. Um, and other ones too. I will be abandoned is in there. I will be alone. So there's certain beliefs, but you have to find out like what limiting beliefs have I carried? And then I have to do the reprogramming to actually recondition those beliefs. You weren't born with them, they got conditioned in and they can be conditioned out. And a great course for that is the Emotional Mastery and Belief Reprogramming course. Using that same link, you can also check that one out for free. Um, and and as you dive into that, you are reconditioning any painful imprints that were left, and it gives you the emotional immunity to in those relationship situations going forward. Because when somebody touches a belief. Like if somebody's critical, but you get the criticism now, you're like, oh, it's about them, and you don't have a belief, I'm not good enough. It's actually hard to personalize it. And last but not least, the way that you needed your parents to behave towards you, how they treated your emotions, how they treated you when you were in pain, when you were having a bad day, how they cared for you, all of those things, write a list of what you needed from the ideal parent and give those things in the relationship to yourself. And you're actually repatterning your subconscious comfort zone to give these things to yourself, which is a very, very powerful experience. So I hope this makes a lot of sense. I hope this is a valuable video for you. I get a tremendous amount of questions about these sorts of things. And I hope this really enables you to start digging deeper into healing. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to the channel. We have literally daily content here. So if you hit the notification bell, you hopefully won't miss any. And thank you so much for watching.